Our next guest took a job at BC Tel straight out of high school in the 1950s. He was installing telephone equipment at a time when they were phasing out telephone magnetos. Those are the machines you have to actually crank to initiate a current to ring the operator. He was extremely capable and rose through the ranks of one of British Columbia's biggest corporations, eventually becoming CEO. Today, he is the chair of TELUS, a company with $10 billion in revenue each year and 40,000 employees. What struck Lynn and I is how this person, who has helped create our history through communication technology, is so passionate about the future. Please welcome Brian Canfield.
So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking a little bit about how technology has influenced our lives to this date, and then talk about some examples that I think will show what technology will be doing for us in the future, and obviously from a telecom perspective. When I started in the company in 1956, as Sam talked about, that was ancient and medieval times, of course. And there was two types of telephones you could have and dial phones. There was the wall phone and the desk phone, and they were black. And other parts of the country were still being served by local operator service and things like that. That's where I started, repairing telephones and getting them out for change. Now that was the latter part of the 50s. Very quickly into the 60s, click, the pace of change is ever increasing. Canadian telcos built their own network right across Canada by investor dollars, not government dollars. It was, that began in the early 60s. And then, of course, the whole electronic era really began in the late 60s and early 70s. And I can tell you that after almost 6 decades in the telecommunication industry, I've observed that the pace of change enabled by technology is absolutely exponential. In fact, change has become the only constant in our knowledge-based economy, and my industry has had to learn to embrace change and adapt. When Motorola put the first handheld cell phone on the market about 30 years ago, you know, it cost around $4,000 before you talked it on, to turn it on. And it had a talk time of about 20 minutes before it needed a 10-hour charge. And it was so big and so heavy, it became known as the brick. But you know, people loved it, and companies moved around the globe and to find ways to reduce the cost and size and to improve the service. When the wireless market really took hold in the early 90s, it cost consumers about $5 an hour or a minute for a minute of airtime. And a few years later, the internet began permeating society, and all sorts of things started to happen. We could actually download photos to our phones. Never mind that the downloading one photo took about the same time as a trip to the dentist. But now, here we go. Now, fast forward to today's technology, that innovation has brought us such remarkable things as Bluetooth, Internet Protocol, which allows us to make calls over the internet, and machine-to-machine, which actually makes it possible for network devices to exchange information and perform actions without any form of human interface. Technology is the ultimate enabler for nearly everything we do, from business and education to mobile, commercial, and networking. Now, looking into the future, technology innovation is based on consumer expectations will continue to drive societal change. We're moving quickly to an age where we'll actually have cell phone towers will be the size of egg cartons, and they'll be located on poles and on light standards, and in fact, that's already happening. Where homes will be connected to the internet through high-speed, fast fiber optics instead of copper cables. We call that gigabit passive optical networks, and that's going ahead right now. Where every parent will have the opportunity to have their child's digital immunization records at their fingertips when they meet their doctor. Where we can actually lower the cost of healthcare by leveraging technology to empower patients and health professionals with information they need to drive a shift from remediation to the prevention of disease. Where you can be at a BC Lions game and order a beer and a hot dog from your smartphone and have it delivered to your seat. Now, all of these innovations have been driven by market forces and consumer demand, particularly here in Canada. We spend more time online than almost anyone else in the world, and our smartphone penetration is 3 times the world average. In fact, 72% of our new network ads on the wireless network are smartphones. And smartphones use incredible amounts of data, as you know, to provide all these new services that we want, the digital streaming and all these new and wonderful services. Companies like TELUS have to relentlessly innovate and invest heavily using shareholder funds to further build out the network and be able to give the services that people expect on their increasingly sophisticated handheld devices. In fact, the wireless industry, and this is probably not really understood, the wireless industry in Canada has only become cash flow positive on a total basis after almost 3 decades of investment due to the huge amounts of capital that must continue to be poured into the network. Now, in fact, the wireless industry has an issue that's very important to it. It's called spectrum. The public radio airwaves that make it possible for you and me to connect our hungry data devices over the wireless network. Spectrum is our highway of the future. Now, the telecom industry and the federal government are sometimes at odds over how best to allocate this very scarce supply. This past summer, the government tried to entice large foreign entities into the wireless market with preferential treatment. Now, having worked in the industry for 57 years, I can say without equivocation that government simply cannot keep up with the speed of change in their regulation. Government simply cannot keep up with this change and dictate how market forces and consumer demand should evolve. The problem is the government comes forward with what they consider to be good public policy and in the public interest. But poor public policy can, in fact, emerge and with its unintended consequences. So go back 5 years. Now, in 5 years back, would you have imagined the technology that exists today? Well, few of us could. So what makes our politicians believe that they have the next 5 years right? History has shown us that when companies compete on a fair and level playing field, consumers are the winners. And as a society, we need to let free markets handle the future. They will improve competition, drive down prices, and enable Canadians to fully realize the power of innovation. Now compare the prices of today's cellular service to those I spoke of when cellular service began. In a thriving competitive marketplace, costs will come down and services will increase. Now, I just have to say, finally, if I can leave you with one thought, it's that in today's information age, rather than trying to control the future, we must prepare for the future and embrace the change. Should we as a society be afraid of an 8-foot wave? Well, I would answer that by saying, if we're on a life raft, you bet. If we're on a surfboard, it's ecstasy. It's the same wave, it's just how you're prepared for it. So it is with technology. Embrace the change it brings and let market forces determine success. As we say, the future's friendly. Thank you for the opportunity to express some thoughts. And you, technology.